Bite-Sized PL, professional learning you can consume during lunch or on a dog walk or while you shop online. Our goal is to provide meaningful, engaging, and brief conversations for educators. I'm Jenette, and my co-host today is Kate.
Hey, Jenette.
Welcome.
So excited.
Well, today we're talking about something that kind of fits in the category of classroom management, which we've had a couple of episodes on. And this one, it's not about managing student behavior directly, but it has a huge indirect effect on student behavior, and that is managing the time in our classrooms, because time is something very precious, and used well, it will affect all of the behavior and learning in the classroom. Used poorly, it just becomes something that makes teachers frustrated and angry and disappointed in themselves.
The use of time and managing behavior are just so connected in the work that we do with students.
Yeah, if they feel like their time is being wasted, even if they don't register that thought, but if things are moving so slowly, there's way too much time, then they act out, they, disengage. On the other hand, if we're racing, then anxiety builds up in some kids, their behavior amps up, and then we often run out of things to do, and then we end up with time that we're kind of held hostage at the end.
Well, this brings really to the first thing that I want to bring up with this topic of managing time in the, instructional time, and that is teaching with urgency. And I found this quote from Edutopia that urgency is the greatest protector of time in the classroom. And whenever I talk about teaching with urgency, I always want to reiterate that it doesn't mean teaching in a panic or stressed out way. What I mean is that we believe, the students believes, everybody believes that every second is precious, and we're going to utilize those precious minutes in our classroom. And you can communicate, you can teach with urgency and communicate that explicitly, right? You can have that conversation with students. I always tried to do a little mini lesson about getting to class and getting right started because we're going to use all this time, but I think the more effective way to communicate that to students is in your practice. How are we teaching with urgency? So I just have a couple of minor suggestions that might contribute to that feeling of, okay, we're moving, things are happening. The first, which Jenette and I are huge fans of, is teaching with a timer. I think a large visual timer is such a great thing, not only for a teacher to kind of pace yourself, but for students to do the same. Especially, I notice in secondary classrooms, right? We get lots of teenagers just kind of
passively letting it roll over them.
We're working on our project, Miss Williams. We got this, no worries. And that visual reminder of this is our time allotted.
Make them feel like what we're doing really matters and our time is precious. That is some great ideas. And I know a lot of our secondary teachers have started using timers, and you just hear such good feedback. It really does transfer well. The kids get it.
They feel it's that feeling. Again, you don't have to say time is precious. You can show them. And I think that goes hand in hand with that visual schedule of like, this is what we're doing today. Another suggestion I wanted to make is using urgency in your language. Again, not in a stressful way, but using things like ready, set, go, or 5 more minutes, or let's get going. Those words of like, hey, let's do this. We got to go. Come on. Ready, set, go.
Yeah. And maybe even giving them along the way 90 more seconds, or, we've got about 1 more minute, or that. Yeah, that is a really good way to help them mark their progress towards whatever the task or the conclusion of the task.
And I really love using go, like right before a task. It feels like it kind of pushes us into like motion into an activity. Another thing that I think absolutely builds urgency in a classroom is circulating when possible. It does feel more urgent when the teacher is walking around as if like, this is matter. I'm holding you accountable to this task, this urgent thing I've given you. One more quick thing that I think really contributes to that, and Jenette and I say this all the time, is changing up those activities so that it does feel, even if you have a 15 question assignment, you're saying, oh, we've got 5 minutes for the first 3 questions. And then we're gonna do a little stand and talk. I'm gonna cold call a few people to expand on question 3. The first 2 people are you and you. I'm changing it up instead of just saying we have 20 or 25, 30 minutes for these 15 questions. Suddenly that time just starts to feel endless for students instead of like 5 minutes on the clock, 3 questions. Go.
Well, you mentioned that you try to instill in your students a sense of, get to class on time. And so let's talk for a couple of minutes about something that we love to talk about, which is how beginnings and endings of a class really matter. And they really show students how much we value their time. So the way we show that beginnings matter is that there's something for students to do as they come into the classroom, and we begin right on time. And in fact, the work has already begun even before the bell rings, because there's a do now or a bell ringer or a starter, whatever you call it. And I recommend that you change it up. It's not every time a math problem that's going to transition us from last night's homework to today's learning. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 math problems, but sometimes it's a task for you and people at your table. Sometimes it's kind of an unrelated thinking problem. It's not a math problem, but it's some kind of a critical thinking exercise that you engage in either individually or as a group. Another thing that I think is really important about beginnings and management is if you have a class period that is especially challenging, or a couple of students in third period that you're anticipating their arrival because they bring stress into your day. It's so important that at the very beginning of the class period or the day, you are standing at the door to greet them. We know you can't do that for every class. You just can't. Sometimes, or maybe for every transition if they go out to a specialist in elementary and then come back. But if you can be there for those students who need to be reminded that you're welcoming them. I'm glad you're here. I'm welcoming you into my space, into my classroom. Come in and let's get started on the activity. And you usher them in with kindness and also leadership. You have that inner authority as you welcome them. That can be a huge part of managing their behavior.
Well, you introduced me to that wonderful quote by one of our favorite authors, Barbara Kingsolver, which was, what is it? The first
sentence of a book makes a promise.
The first sentence of the book makes a promise. And we talked about that in relation to like hooks, right? The first part of class. But I love talking about it in relation to setting up for good behavior. Like I'm here's my first sentence. I'm here at the door and I'm welcoming you into my space. With those students, I'm in charge, right? I'm making you a promise that, I'll take care of the class. I've got something planned and I love that.
Yeah. So think about that first, say the first 2 or 3 or 5 minutes, make a promise. I'm going to use your time well. We're going to have fun in class. I care about you. I'm excited about my content area or our topic today. All of those things they don't have to be said directly, but they're communicated to students. And so that for you set that tone in the first few minutes and they're like, oh yeah, that's right. We come in here, we get right to work. It feels fun. It feels engaging. It uses my brain. It's not just about learning, but about thinking and critical thinking especially. So think about your beginnings and see what you can do. And then endings, of course, are really important as well. And we sometimes talk about my policy that I don't ever watch movies with English teachers in them, or really any great teacher.
Any great teacher.
Because it's just too much pressure. And it's not just about the hair, makeup, and wardrobe, but it's also about the script. Like they have script writers who put beautiful speeches into their mouths,
And students that are super anxious to hear these wonderful,
they lead these
speeches.
Discussions that are just like, oh my gosh, they're so thoughtful. And then when you try that in your own classroom, you're like, I'm no Michelle Pfeiffer or whatever, or Mr. Holland. And but I think the point I want to make about that is it doesn't take that long as a teacher to craft a closing idea. But sometimes it's hard to do on our feet. So as we anticipate our lessons for the day, what will be that 2 or 3 minute closing thing that I do where I'm checking for understanding, where I'm encouraging them? when I'm saying we worked hard today. You know, our friend Kellen Davis at Sunset Junior High, he takes a couple of minutes at the end of a period to say, I ask a lot of you guys. You worked really hard today. You did math problems today that will be on no test you'll ever have to take for, you know, end of level. But you killed it. You know, all of that. He makes me believe in myself. He makes me feel like I could do 8th grade math, you know.
Which I can't. But
he makes us feel like we can. So think about that. What is the thing you can do at the end of a class period that makes the students be reminded our time was well spent today?
And as a scatterbrained type B teacher, a suggestion that I do have for this is I gave a class job to one of my type A students to watch that clock and tell me when it was time. And it was time. We, you know, if we needed to clean up something, if we need, you know, whatever it needed to be, so that we could have that feeling of closure, that bring it back, whatever I had planned. And because time does get away from us. And so put that mental load on someone in the class and say, you're going to tell me when we have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is left, and remind me, and that's our go time.
Yeah, and then we'll have our closing procedure so that the room is prepared for the next class or the next day or whatever. And then also it'll give us a chance to check understanding, build community, laugh together, share a little anecdote, a little story, or whatever it is, make it feel so that when they leave, there was some closure. And I think as teachers, we often just run the clock. And we do get distracted, but we're really missing an opportunity. Now, how do we know if we've done well? Well, we all have students who leave the class saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, that always makes you feel great. Mm-hmm. But occasionally, you'll have a student leave the class that says, good class today.
Yeah.
Or that was fun, or I enjoyed that. Mm-hmm. And that lets you know that they really noticed that you used the time well, the learning time well in that class. So think about your endings.
This leads right into this last bit of advice, which is minimizing non-learning time, which I understand sounds weird when we're talking about, you know, maximizing learning time, but really focusing on, and the first tip we have for this is those strong procedures so that it is a habit to come back, so that you aren't having to work so hard to get the 42 teenagers or the, you know, 25, 6-year-olds back with you. It's what is that, you know, cue word for the end of class? How have you practiced that? How are you rewarding that, you know, at the beginning of the year, so that by January you're saying, clean up, and it's happening, and they're coming back in. So really putting in that time, again, it's going to help on both sides. You're going to save yourself time and you're going to maximize that instructional time, but you're also going to improve that like behavior.
Yeah, can I share? I just had a conversation last night with one of the university supervisors that supervises our student teachers. And she called me and she said, I have to tell you about the class I just left. 1st grade class. She said that student teacher was amazing. We have to hire her as soon as possible. And she said at the end of the math lesson, she pulled them all together on the rug and they had a metacognition moment where they reflected on their learning. And she had her questions scripted that she asked them and then invited them to share thoughts about their learning. And this supervisor said, she said, I almost cried. It was just so beautiful to see those little 1st graders taking that time. And boy, talk about a procedure. They knew exactly what the plan was. They were prepared with their thoughts. They knew they'd have this opportunity to talk about their learning. And she said it was just magic. And that's 1st grade.
And you know, right? We did a whole episode recently about procedures, like the work, right? The work that it takes to establish that, so that these magic little moments that we know are great teaching can happen. Let's acknowledge it is work, and it is like that mental load of like, okay, how can I set myself up for success?
But the payoff for putting the time in on the procedures is then things flow.
Yes.
You're not frustrated. Oh my gosh, it reduces the frustration in your, you know, in the teacher so much if you get kids to that place. So it's so worth time.
And it's even worth, I believe, like ending class intentionally puts me as a teacher, like you said, just in a better mood to start the next class. I'm not frantic. I've ended in quiet. That's important to me. Starting and ending in quiet was really important to me because then I could feel grounded, right? My class had a lot of moments, but if we could just end with a little bit of metacognition and some quiet, it felt like, okay, now we can start in quiet. And that made me happier, selfishly. It's good practice and makes you happier. The other little tip that I want to give with minimizing non-learning time, and really for all time, is that strong plan. And I'm not even talking about a super detailed, not scripted. I just mean I have a plan, because students know. It's like they know, they can sense when it's like, there's a plan for today. Here's the things. And I'm going to move through it with that sense of urgency to help guide you along. It really does. You cannot pick up the end of the stick that has that pacing and attention to time without picking up the other end and creating strong behaviors in your students. It just kind of starts to flow of, I've got something prepared. Let's move through it. I'm going to support you with timers, warnings, circulating, all of these things. And we're going to arrive at the end having done something.
So fun to talk about this stuff. Thanks, Kate. We get to give gifts since we don't have a guest today.
Woo-hoo. I'll start.
And in fact, we'll even ask Tom if he has one, since Tom's running the show here behind the scenes. But he's got something fun to share, I bet. Kate, what have you got?
Okay, my gift today is I had my first London Fog tea from Starbucks yesterday, and I cannot tell you how delicious it was. I came into the office just raving about this Earl Grey lavender tea with steamed oat milk. It was a little bit floral, kind of sweet and very creamy, and it gave me a lot of caffeine. It made me insufferable, but the drink itself was just delicious.
The London Fog. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to get one. I'm going to share the Apple TV series called Shrinking, which has Jason Segel and Harrison Ford as psychiatrists or therapists, at least. And I think they're trying to hit the Ted Lasso audience with this series. I don't think they're quite. It's no Ted Lasso.
Well, who is?
There's some good laugh out loud moments for me, and it's pretty clever. So if you trigger warning, if you like a Ted Lasso kind of flow and vibe, then Shrinking is similar.
Well, this is probably not a surprise for anyone, but I'm really into video. And lately, I've been kind of going through my computer files, looking at old home videos. And boy, it is just so fun to go down memory lane and to remember what life was like 20 years ago. My wife and I, sometimes we'll just lay in bed at night and look at pictures of our little girls. And we did it last night. And the pictures aren't that old, right? They're only our girls are young. And we were looking at pictures of 2 years ago and just loving the memories and missing those little girls.
My husband and I will do this. We will have had the worst bedtime with our 4-year-old, and then we'll be looking through pictures of him. And we're like, should we go wake him up?
Yeah.
Should we go wake him up? We want to be with him. Oh, look how cute he is. I love it.
So yeah, my gift is go back and just enjoy some of your old photos and videos, because it's magic.
Yes, that's a great one. Thanks for sharing. All right, as always, thanks to Tom for making us sound so good. This season, we are also putting video of the podcast on YouTube. You can continue listening on your favorite podcast app and also check out the video on our YouTube channel. Check the show notes for that link. Thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe and share the podcast with others. See you at school.